Good afternoon. My name is Joey Wender, and I'm the Executive Director of the SHLB Coalition. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Making Sense of the New E-Rate Bidding Portal. A major shift is coming to the E-Rate program, and preparation now is critical for success. The FCC recently approved the requirement of a new competitive bidding portal for FY28 that will significantly change how applicants and vendors manage and document the bidding process. In today's webinar, our expert panel will walk through what's changing, how the new portal will work, what steps you should expect prior to the portal's rollout. So whether you're part of a school or a library system, you're a service provider, or you're another E-rate stakeholder, you'll leave with a clear understanding of what to expect and how to prepare for the portal. So to bring this discussion to life, our conversation will be led today by the great Kristen Cora, Shelby's Policy Counsel, and we have two true experts on E-rate that are joining us today to help break down what the portal will mean for all of you. So Gina Spade, Principal at Broadband Legal Strategies, and Deb Kriete, the State E-rate Coordinator, State E-rate Coordinators Alliance. We are so excited to have both of them on here today to share their expertise. So before we get started, just a reminder about the logistics of the webinar. It's being recorded and it will be available on our website afterwards. Audience members are muted but are encouraged to use the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box if you want to send us your questions, which we'll get to at the end. As always, please follow Shelby at @SHLB Coalition on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and YouTube. We also want to thank our corporate sponsors, Ready, Zayo, T-Mobile, Cisco, and Tirana. We would not be able to engage in our work without their financial support. Two final things. One, if you enjoy and value these webinars, please do consider becoming a Shelby member if you are not one already. We do need your support. And finally, we'd like to encourage everyone on this webinar to attend AnchorNets. It's the nation's leading broadband conference for anchors, and it's happening in Arlington, Virginia, October 7th through 9, 2026. It's where broadband policy meets real-world action. And so we encourage you to register today. Okay, it's time to turn attention to the issue. And so I'm going to hand it off to Kristen Cora.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm so happy to see everyone attending from all over. Keep putting where you're coming from in the chat. We love to see that. So today we are going to do an initial dive into the FCC's new requirements concerning the competitive bidding portal for the E-rate program. Our speakers will touch on as many topics as possible, given the time that we have today, including the timeline of the portal, record keeping, state master contracts, and multi-stage bidding. They will also discuss considerations that apply to various stages of the competitive bidding process, including prior to and during competitive bidding, as well as what happens after bids are due, opened, and evaluated. Now, keep in mind, we don't yet have all of the answers or clarifications. This is an ongoing process, so there are things that we still need clarification on, and there are questions that you might have that we might not be able to answer quite yet. Our speakers have prepared slides, which will be available after the presentation, and the recording will also be available for you to rewatch as many times as you'd like. If you do have questions, as Joey said, please add them to the Q&A box. However, keep in mind that your question that you might have at the beginning may be addressed later on in the presentation. So before we turn it over to our wonderful speakers, I wanted to give just a little bit of the historical context behind the item that we are looking at today. So on April 9th, the FCC released a draft report and order that they were going to vote on to adopt at their open commission meeting later that month. Now, the report and order addressed two items, two notices of proposed rulemakings that they previously took public comment on. So this included a proposal to implement a new competitive bidding portal in E-rate. This was teed up back in 2021. It also included various rule clarifications and changes to help streamline E-rate program administration, and this was first put out for comment back in 2023. The FCC voted to approve these items at the end of April. Now, prior to their vote, SHLB and other organizations met with FCC staff, and here we shared our concerns and questions, especially related to the competitive bidding portal and its associated requirements. After the vote, the FCC released its final report and order on May 1st. And the final document does include many of the items that SHLB and others had advocated for, including the directive for the FCC and USAC to gather stakeholder feedback as the portal is implemented. We know that this will be a big change for small and large applicants, service providers, so creating the space for stakeholder engagement was crucial. So with that context in mind, today's webinar will only cover the portion of the final report and order that creates the competitive bidding portal. So to keep things moving, I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to our first speaker. This will be Gina Spade, and she is going to first address the timeline and requirements to keep in mind prior to and during competitive bidding. With that, Gina, take it away.
Thanks, Kristen. I just wanted to remind all of you listeners, I'm so glad to be here with you all today, that although Deb and I are lawyers, we're not providing legal advice today. We're trying to provide a summary of the Commission's order. And as Kristen just mentioned, the first thing we're going to talk about is timing. Even though this order just came out, was just released by the Commission and has been published in the Federal Register, most of the action items, the things that you're going to need to pay attention to, will not happen until next year related to the portal. So the portal itself is not expected to be available until July 1st, 2027, which is when competitive bidding can begin for funding year 2028. So all of these new competitive bidding rules and requirements apply for funding year 2028. The Commission has made a Plan B if the portal isn't available by next July, that the documentation will still need to be provided for funding year 2028, just through a different process. You don't need to do anything different for your competitive bidding process for funding year 2027 for next year. So that's kind of the big picture timeline. And then as Kristen mentioned, some of the rest of the discussion is going to be broken up into the different time periods of the competitive bidding process. So first I'm going to talk about, on the next slide, what needs to happen differently prior to bidding. And the answer is not a lot. The same rules and processes still apply prior to the competitive bidding process beginning. You still have to fill out and upload a Form 470. The communications prior to the uploading of the Form 470 do not have to be conducted in the competitive bidding portal. You're still allowed to have those communications. The Commission did not change any rules around that. Applicants are still allowed to ask questions of potential vendors that they may meet with before starting a competitive bidding process. But of course, you still cannot get into the details of what you plan to put out for bid, what applicants plan to put out for bid, or get input from potential service providers on your competitive bidding documentation or process. So all of those rules are still the same. Kind of the only mention the Commission made in discussing the portal regarding the Form 470 came with respect to its discussion about state and local requirements. And the Commission noted that applicants should include instructions regarding additional state and local requirements on their Form 470, which again is what folks do today when filling out their Form 470. So in sum, everything prior to bidding pretty much stays the same. The big changes come during the competitive bidding process. So once the portal is up and running, service providers will have to submit all of their bids in the portal. Um, all communications between applicants and those potential bidders or vendors will be either conducted in the portal or uploaded into the portal. So they will all eventually either happen in pretty close to real time in the portal or will be uploaded into the portal. So the commission clarified that applicants can still hold meetings, walkthroughs, other communications with applicants outside of the portal, but all of those questions and answers have to be uploaded, a summary of those have to be uploaded into the portal within 72 hours. That's kind of a real-time requirement. And those communications include questions about the RFP itself. So the commission is really envisioning here, most of the communications are going to happen in some sort of fashion in the portal. The commission also directed USAC to develop a process by which questions could be submitted anonymously by vendors if that's permitted by state law. So that's going to be another component of the communication aspects. And Deb is going to talk a little bit more about the communication requirements and when they kind of start and stop when she talks about the later part of the competitive bidding process. Um, Other documentation, including the bid evaluation documentation, vendor selection documentation, has to be uploaded with the Form 471 application. And this is quite a long list of things that the commission is looking for, award notices, board minutes, the contract, of course. So I just put a reference in here so you can go and look at the order. It's footnote 68, and it's also in the commission's rules, the detailed information. This list pretty much mirrors documentation that applicants are, and service providers as well, are required to keep as part of just the regular record keeping requirements for the program. But the commission did give a list. It said it was a non-exhaustive list, so there could be other documentation that isn't specifically listed on there. But you want to make sure and take a look at that because all of that documentation will have to be uploaded when you file your application. Okay, so one thing that came up a lot, next slide, please, Henry. During the commission's discussion about the competitive bidding process is how these new rules will work with already existing state and local procurement rules. And the commission said this has been the rule since the very beginning of the program that in addition to E-rate procurement requirements that you have to follow, you also have to follow your own state and local procurement rules. And that's still the rule. And that's the case even if your state and local rules require a hard copy of the bid to be submitted or sealed bids to be submitted. So essentially, service providers, when submitting their bids, may have to follow two different processes that have different requirements. So you may have to submit a sealed bid to your local school district and also upload your bid into the E-rate portal. In this discussion, the commission found that no party had presented what the commission considered an actual conflict with state and local rules. So the commission found it didn't need to preempt any state or local rules, but it did say if there was a conflict that people saw that a party, the applicant here, would be able to request a waiver of the commission's requirements if they necessary to follow their own state law. The commission also said that if different information is submitted in two different portals or two different processes, that could constitute a competitive bidding violation. So it's going to be really important when service providers are responding to bids to make sure that they are submitting the same information, the same accurate information in multiple places if that is required. The commission also said that USAC is going to develop an audit log. So really tracking the access to documents in the portal to make sure that if state and local law requires or prohibits, I guess, review of those bids before a certain time period or before the deadline, for bids to be received is up, that would be one thing that USAC could check and make sure that that didn't actually happen. So I think now I'm going to, if we can go to the next slide, turn it over to Deb to talk about what happens at the end of the competitive bidding process.
Good afternoon. As Gina mentioned, one of the biggest challenges in interpreting and applying the new order is determining what information needs to be submitted in real time, interactively, and in connection with the conduct of your bid, and what information can be uploaded at a later time, meaning treating the bid portal as a repository. So the general rule, which is in section C6, Gina mentioned, and I want to encourage all of you to really look at this list. It is a laundry list, non-exhausted, of all of the documentation that must be provided in the portal, whether it is in real time or after the bidding process is completed. And the time period that this covers is when you initiate your Form 470 in the portal up until the time that there is a contract award. This contract award can be either a notice that's posted in the portal, this is a new concept, or the actual contract itself. The benefit of putting a notice of award in the portal is at that time the obligation to continue to upload information in real time ceases. Now, the exception for using the portal for communication is if you have a requirement to communicate outside of the portal under state and local law. So this would be in those circumstances where you have a dual portal situation where the state or there's a local portal that requires the submission of bids in a different fashion, the submission of questions in a different fashion. The parties may continue to use those processes and at the same time also comply with the submission of the same documentation in the portal. So what they're saying is that that does not violate the requirement that all communications have to be conducted in the portal. Now, after the contract award notice is issued and before submitting the 471, many parties will engage in contract negotiation. And the negotiation will be not required to be included in the portal. It's considered confidential. It does not have to be uploaded, meaning the different drafts of the contract and any communications and emails, etc. Those do not have to be in the portal. However, once the contract is signed, then you do need to upload the signed contract and all of the bid evaluation documentation. Also, if you are using month-to-month service, so you don't have a contract, then the applicant would need to upload a copy of the bill, an offer of service from the vendor, a letter or other similar documentation from the service provider to substantiate the service and the terms of the service. We could go to the next slide. Now, what I'm going to focus on are situations that are a little bit different than the normal contract between an applicant and a service provider. So what we're going to cover here are master contracts, consortia contracts. We're going to talk about mini bids and things of that nature. So master contracts are covered in paragraph 33 of the order. And let me just start out by saying that I have read this particular paragraph at least 2 to 3 dozen times, and I assure you that I remain somewhat confused. So I'm going to try to parse and discern what I believe are the key concepts here. And I'm also going to be quite honest and tell you where I think there's lack of clarity that we would benefit from further guidance.
And Deb, can I just say one thing here? I just want to emphasize that this is a theme here from Shelby, that in part we're trying to educate as all our stakeholders and all our members and everyone that cares so much about E-rate, but at the same time, our advocacy is continuing. There are clear areas where there's confusion or there's ambiguity, and we need more answers or we want changes to the item. And so that advocacy will continue. I just wanted to insert that don't want people to feel that we're not working on those issues. It's clear there are problems and there is a lack of clarity in a lot of areas. Thanks, Deb.
Absolutely, and that will just simply continue Shelby's leadership in this area, along with other stakeholder groups that have been working alongside of Shelby. So when an applicant relies on a state master contract and either contracts under the terms and conditions of that contract or considers a state master contract as a bid response, the order says that the applicant has to upload a copy of that state master contract and related bidding documentation when filing the 471. What is unclear to me is whether this requirement applies to all state master contracts or just those that exist outside of the E-rate space. So there's really two flavors of state master contracts. There's those that have been bid using the E-rate process. We call those E-rate qualified state master contracts. Then there are many other state master contracts that exist in government, and those are bid using a different process that may or may not comply with E-rate. So the first area of uncertainty is, does this requirement that you have to upload the state master contract apply to all master contracts or just those that weren't bid through E-rate? The other part that's unclear on this sentence is, what does it mean by related bidding documentation? Does this mean the applicant's related bidding documentation in connection with their 470 procurement, or does it mean the related bidding documentation that gave rise to the execution and signing of that state master contract? I'm unsure. Others with whom I have consulted also remain a little unsure, and so this is an area that would benefit from clarification. I want to flag it though, because again, if you're using master contracts, this is an area you're going to want to pay attention to the development of the guidance. The second kind of contracts that the FCC spoke about in this section of the order are what they call consortia contracts. These are when you have a consortia lead, for example, state network or regional network, and the lead consortium member, build entity, will conduct a competitive procurement, enter into contract on behalf of the consortium members, and then file the 471. What they're saying makes sense. Have the consortia lead be responsible for uploading all of that bidding documentation. They were the build entity that had actually conducted the competitive bid. All of that documentation is within their purview. What the order doesn't address clearly is who's responsible for uploading documentation when there is a consortia lead, like a state agency, that conducts an E-rate bidding procurement for a state master contract. They execute the contract, the umbrella contract, on behalf of the applicants that are eligible to use that contract, but the lead agency doesn't actually file the consortia contract. Doesn't file the 471 rather, pardon me, I misspoke. So what happens in that situation? Again gets back to who's the responsible party for uploading the documentation, the contract. If we could move, Henry, to the next slide. So two other types of procurements that were mentioned, all of which, again, this is paragraph 33. They talk about mini bids. Now, mini bids occur when there is a state master contract that's E-rate qualified, that's a multi-award contract. So you've got different vendors or different product lines or different vendors that offer different services. And there's a process then that the applicant must conduct to then seek what they call mini bids from all eligible vendors for the particular service or equipment they're purchasing. What the order says is that the applicant, as currently the case, they don't have to file a 470 in the portal, but they do have to upload the mini bid documentation, including all of the vendor selection process and resulting contract in the portal. And it does appear that this documentation can be uploaded before the 471 is filed, and again, not in real time, meaning it does not appear that the mini bid has to be conducted inside the portal. And then the last situation to address is multi-stage bidding. So this occurs when you may have a criteria to qualify bidders to move on to a second phase of bidding, or you may have what they call a best and final offer. And the order does state that all phases of the bidding process must be conducted inside the portal, and that the functionality will be developed to send and receive requests for BAFOs to certain bidders or vendors, and that applicants, when they ask questions and receive answers from bidders, whether it's through the multi-stage process or any other time for that matter, that those questions and answers must go through the portal. And of course, the applicant needs to be uploading and keeping a bid evaluation decision for each stage of the bidding process. And that's consistent with existing rules. And then they would upload that documentation at the end, along with their submission of their contract. I think we have one more slide.
Yes, thank you, Deb.
Yes, thank you. So multi-year contracts, if you have a multi-year contract that you are going to procure beginning July 1, 2027 or later, then you would be required to you would only have to submit that documentation in the first year of the contract. You would not have to submit it in multiple years. If you have a modification in a later year, you would have to upload that modification. And then importantly, what about those situations where you have an existing multi-year contract that was bid and executed prior to the bidding portal coming into existence, and you're still going to be using and relying on that contract for funding year 2029. So this would be the second year in which the portal was in effect. They have given applicants in those circumstances a 1-year grace period, essentially, that they don't have to upload all of that documentation for their existing contract until funding year 2029. And if the applicant has already previously submitted that documentation to USAC, perhaps in response to a competitive bidding review or some other inquiry, then they are not required to have to submit the documentation a second time. So I think I'll turn it back over to you, Kristen.
Perfect. Okay.
Oh.
And before we go back into our presentation, Gina, I know you want to talk about record keeping, but I do want to hit some of the questions that we've received so far in the Q&A. So Gina, I'm going to throw a few questions over to you if you don't mind. So first is a question about the Form 470. So this person asks, will the 470 be modified to allow the applicant to input a specified ACD if 28 days or greater?
So that's a great question, Kristen. And I think one of those things that we might see as this process evolves over time, it is possible that the commission will update the Form 470 to, you know, adjust some things it wants to gather information on earlier in the process. That is not something that was, here, I'm trying to find the exact question again. That will, no, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question? Because I'm trying to see, or did you
Sure.
answer it all?
Yes.
You marked it answered already. But there might definitely be some changes as the process goes along. Both USAC sometimes makes updates to the Form 470 to allow for those things. I think right now, and Deb, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you want to specify specific dates for when bids are due, you can put that in the narrative. And so that's what you can do, and if the commission does not change the form to specifically ask that question.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so another question. Will service providers need to use the portal during funding year 27 if the portal is available on 7/1/27?
Right. So another good question. So for funding year 27, the competitive bidding process will actually be complete before applications are filed, usually March or April, before the funding year begins. So using those dates, what will happen is for funding year 27, the competitive bidding process could start anytime after this July 1, couldn't finish up anytime before the applications are due next March or April. And then the funding year begins in July 1st, 27. Because the portal won't be available until the funding year begins, none of that process for 27 will occur in the portal. So for all of next year's competitive bidding process, we're just going to have the status quo. The portal won't exist. It won't become available until after those applications are filed. So I hope that provides a little clarification on the timing.
Perfect. All right, so then we had a question related to communications. Will all communications in the portal be fully public to all parties at all time? Or will our unique portal access only show the person their specific communications around their specific 470s and contracts?
Right. So the commission does talk in this order about confidential data and confidential communications. So it's not 100% clear how that's all going to flesh out, but my guess is there will be limited access to some communications during the process that there'll be, I'm not sure if you're an applicant or service provider asking this question, but probably the authorized user for the applicants will be able to see the communications. It might be anonymous, as mentioned already. Some of the questions might be anonymous, but there's probably going to be some restrictions around who can access what information. Deb, did you have a different thought on that, or?
No, I just wanted to add that there's an opportunity for functionality to be specifically developed so that you could have party-to-party communication, especially when you are asking clarifying questions in response to a bid. So the other bidders wouldn't necessarily see those clarifying questions. And to that point as well, bids themselves are not going to be publicly available among other bidders until, and it's unclear again whether that will be permanently withheld from public view. And then you would have to go through the usual state right to know or FOIA process, which is how most interested vendors and parties get copies of bids. And there's language in the FCC order that states that they want the general counsel's office to look at this question of whether there's other information that should be made publicly available at a later time.
Okay, thank you. All right, Gina, let's go back to your presentation if you want to talk about record keeping.
Sure thing. Okay. So as everyone on this call hopefully knows, E-rate participants, both applicants and service providers, are required to keep documentation that shows compliance with the rules for 10 years after the last date of service related to that specific contract. So the commission did not change that rule. That is still a requirement. However, the commission noted a couple of different places that all of the documentation that you would be uploading into the portal, you don't have to separately keep. And so that's, you know, um, that's there. I think they're saying that they're going to be responsible. The portal's going to hold that documentation, and that is honestly one bright spot of this order. That's another place where applicants may be able to access their own documents after some time period has passed. And also that USAC has said that or the commission has said that USAC and the FCC will go first to the portal to get that documentation, which hopefully will cut down on PIA and information requests from USAC during application review. So the other thing, Deb already talked a little bit about confidentiality and how some data the commission is going to say is presumptively confidential. And we'll see kind of how that fleshes out as time goes on. The commission also specifically said that USAC is still required to complete all of its workable funding requests by September 1st. Commenters raised some concern about with all this new additional documentation and data, would USAC still be able to get its reviews done in a timely fashion, get commitments out the door? And the commission explained in a footnote that it did not anticipate USAC reviewing every single competitive bidding process, just like it doesn't do that now. But it would try to do more reviews in the first year of a multi-year contract, which was one of SHLB's requests. And then finally, around record keeping and documentation, the commission specifically said that access to the portal, to the competitive bidding part of the portal would be limited to the account administrator and two other authorized users. And as I mentioned before, the commission directed USAC to develop a process to have audit logs so they can see which user is accessing the document and when that happens.
Wonderful.
I think
Okay.
that's it.
All right, perfect. So now we are at the point of the presentation where we definitely want to go through more questions. So we're going to do this a little bit like a rapid fire. We're going to go for about 10 more minutes, just so we can try to get as many questions as possible. So keep sending your questions in, even if we don't get them today. It's good for us to have a list of the things that are, concerning to everybody. So that way, future opportunities to address these items, we know what's important for everybody. Okay, so let's go through some of the questions that we have. So either Deb or Gina, whoever wants to answer, please just jump in. So first question, if someone is submitting a 470 for funding year 2027, will they need to submit again during this funding cycle?
No, they will, if you have a contract that's been entered into, you don't have to redo the bidding process. You would just need to upload that documentation if that contract is going to be cited as the service agreement for any FRN for funding year 2029. You would want to have to upload that documentation then.
Perfect. Okay. Will an applicant still be able to use a letter of intent to award in place of a contract if there is not time to complete the contract before the 471 window closes?
I would say that is going to be a matter of state and local law. You would want to look to get legal advice from your solicitor. If that letter of intent is considered legally binding, then I would think that you would be permitted to do that because that was part of the modernization orders from 2014. They said that you could use other documentation of evidence of a legally binding commitment.
Okay. If someone has a contract amendment that adds additional service that will not be E-rate eligible, does this communication need to be conducted in the portal?
This is near and dear to my heart because as a South Dakota E-rate coordinator, we have this issue all the time, and we raise this issue in our comments. And I believe, subject to getting confirmation from the FCC, that you would not have to do that because that has nothing to do with the E-rate eligible services or commitments. And I see Gina nodding as well, so that's good.
That's right. I would agree with that assessment.
Yes, but this is one of the questions that we do want to make sure to clarify as well. Is there a dollar amount that doesn't require all of the new procurement portal requirements? For example, if a single school with less than 25K in costs prior to reimbursement, would they be subject to these requirements?
Unfortunately, there is no exemption. And even if you don't get a bid, there's no exemption that you would have to go back out and obtain a bid and use that, upload that documentation as part of your decision-making process.
That's right. The commission specifically said if you solicit bids and get quotes in response to the scenario Deb just said, then you have to get all of that documentation uploaded in the portal.
Okay, will the bidding documentation, such as addendums, be available outside of the portal like they currently are with open data?
That's an excellent question that I don't know the answer to, but I think it's certainly one that it is one to be obtained clarification from the FCC.
Yeah. I would also add to that, and the commission did say it did not intend to change the data that's available now through open data with this order. But there have been instances over the past few years where, as USAC has changed the systems and what people file, then some of the data that was previously more easily accessible isn't there anymore, or some of the fields aren't being filled in quite as much. So that is definitely something that we would need to keep an eye on.
Please review how existing multi-year contracts signed prior to 2028 program year are handled. What is the grace period?
So, and keep me honest, Gina and Kristen. If it was signed and so the portal takes effect for funding your 2028 procurements, which begin July 1, 2027. If you have a contract that was entered into before the portal went into effect, and you're continuing to use that contract in funding your 2029, you have to upload the documentation in 2029. So in 2028, even though the contract wasn't executed as part of the portal process, you have that 1-year grace period. And you would then have to upload it in for your funding your 2029 application.
Okay, thank you, Deb. All right, let's do one more. Okay, so Deb, somebody asks if you can repeat what you said regarding the Cabio type of situation or even a Category 2 exemption for libraries. So would quotes and contracts still have to be uploaded into the portal, or can folks continue down the same path as before and upload those documents and contract into the contracts portion of the EPC portal?
This is an outstanding question. Cabio itself, I don't believe was specifically mentioned in the order. What was mentioned is if you were actively conducting a procurement in the portal and you didn't receive any bids, that you would, or were relying on month-to-month service, that you would be able to go out and get a bid, or you would be able to upload other documentation or evidence of the service offering. So the Cabio, we need to get clarification on. If I had to harbor a guess, it would be sort of business as usual because Cabio currently does not require you to conduct a bid evaluation or a bidding process. That's why there's an exemption for it.
That's right. I would say the only thing the commission might say there, and again, we don't know, is that if you have a contract, they might want that piece of paper uploaded, even though you don't have the rest of the competitive bidding process. But that is one of the questions that I think would be great to ask the FCC.
If
Agreed.
I'm not mistaken, and I may be, that you already have to upload a copy of the contract for Cabio
Okay.
currently, so.
Cool. Okay, and then to finish out our rapid fire, Deb, I know that you had some tips and tricks, best practices. So, what would you suggest to our attendees as best practices as they prepare for this change?
So although use the next year to get ready and look at what the documentation is going to be required in the portal and start keeping your records for any procurements you start to conduct for in the next year so that you already are in that sort of cadence and practice of retaining all of that documentation and information. And you want to look at your local and state bidding requirements and what are the specific terms and conditions that you want to impose, as you're allowed to, for your bidding process. What are your disqualification criteria? And start to get all of that information prepared so that when it's time for you to conduct your bidding process inside the portal, you have that information at the ready.
All right, thank you so much. So, Henry, we've got a couple of slides we're going to kick back up. And so I just wanted to jump in here and say and wrap up that as you can see, there's more left to do as the portal is developed and implemented. So there's a lot of clarification in the final order, but there are going to be questions that pop up, especially as applicants and service providers start using the new system. So from a SHLB perspective, it's so important to submit questions and feedback so that any of these issues and questions are answered early on. So SHLB is going to continue to engage with the Commission and USAC as the bidding portal is implemented and share real-time stakeholder feedback. Also, this conversation itself is not over. So we plan to have our speakers back at SHLB's AnchorNets conference this year to discuss these requirements and to continue to gather feedback just like we did today. So if this webinar was helpful, make sure to check out our AnchorNets conference. And I'm going to hand it over to Joey to end our webinar.
Well, let me first thank Chris and Cora for your tremendous work on this issue, and Gina and Deb. Just we could not have achieved the changes in the portal that we were able to get at the FCC without both of you, and we're not going to be able to, figure this thing out and find a way through all the challenges of the portal without the two of you. So I think everybody should be so fortunate to have these two incredible experts on our call today. And I definitely encourage folks to come out to AnchorNets. They'll be there live and we'll be digging much deeper on the portal. And I think by then, October feels like a long time from now, but it's not. We will have more answers at that point, and more things will have happened between now and then as they begin implementation of the portal. So we've come to the end of the webinar. The recording will be available on our website, so encourage you to watch and rewatch this terrific content. Also want to thank again our sponsors, Ready, Zayo, T-Mobile, Tirana, and Cisco. And just a reminder, if you've enjoyed these webinars, please become a SHLB member today. It's easy to sign up. We'll talk about coming attractions. Our next webinar will be at the end of next month in July on cybersecurity, and really hope that you join us then. Finally, I want to emphasize that we want folks to attend AnchorNet. It's the nation's leading broadband conference for anchors. It's here in DC in Arlington, Virginia, October 7 through 9. It's where broadband policy meets real-world action, and we plan to devote a number of hours to discuss the portal at AnchorNets, and you won't want to miss that discussion. So we hope to see you in Arlington in October. So thank you again for attending this webinar, and we'll see you next time.